love speed paints. These transparent, colorful colors have changed the way that I paint miniatures, and I can't imagine attacking a project without dipping into my tower of speed paints. I've got all of them ready at a moment's notice, and I have used up so many of these bottles because very rarely does something come across my painting desk without getting a little bit of the speed paint treatment. I've even painted all of the caps so that I can see the color inside at a moment's notice. And speaking of those colors, Ancient Honey, Gillydew, Darkwood, not just a great scary video game, also a really good Army Painter Brown, and the trifecta, Noble Skin, Grim Black, and Occultist Cloak are like the only colors you'll ever need to paint weapons. I love me some speed paints. But now, there's a new flavor of speed paint. Speed paint markers. An interesting idea. I want to try them out. These markers are the newest weapon from the Army Painter. They take the power of a paintbrush loaded with speed paint and instead turn it into a marker. To get these markers ready, you need a little bit of prep work. You're meant to press them into the back of the caps, but it feels like the felt tip is a little bit too long and hits the inside. I'm nervous about damaging them, so I'll just use my fingernail to push up the tips. I held them like this for a while until the paint had flowed all the way through the nubs. Giving them a quick try on my fingernail, the paint seems to flow off them nicely. I switched to a playing card, and as markers, these things seem to work just fine. Now, I'm a little dubious of these speed paint pens because they seem to play into the idea of slapping the speed paint on and it'll look pretty good. And that's kind of true, but there's a lot more nuance to it. Because I remember when speed paint first came out, and I got some and I slapped it on my minis, and it did not look good. But after lots of trial and error and learning how to properly use these paints, now I do slap it on, and it does look pretty good, but it took a lot of effort. And I'm wondering if these markers are kind of gonna erase a little bit of that effort. All right. Time to give it a try. The speed paint markers have passed the first test. I was worried that the paint would dry faster than I could put it down, and it would lead to streakiness. This wasn't really the case. I was able to get the speed paint down pretty quick, putting green all over his body, and it did work to do the speed paint thing of getting darker in the recesses and being a little brighter on the raised areas. Switching colors, I took this bony matter marker and put this on his leg wraps and his butt. In a perfect world, I would use this as a base coat for his pant leg and then glaze the hardened leather around it. But as I used the pen, I discovered that there's no wiggle room in application. The speed paint flows from the nib exactly the same way every time. It's very consistent, but I do wish it had some more finesse. I grabbed the gray speed paint pen and started hitting all the metal stuff. I thought it was going to be really weird using a marker instead of a paintbrush, but it's actually really intuitive. I had no trouble at all using it, and the marker is accurate. I was able to get the paint exactly where I wanted it, and there was no problem avoiding the spots that I had already done. These pens are a little less messy than my normal brushes, although a little paint splatter is no problem if my phone is protected by one of the lovely cases from today's sponsor, Bullstrap. If you're like me, you've always relied on whatever phone case happens to fit your phone. You don't think about it much, but think about all of the time you spend on your phone. With all the time and effort that goes into using your phone, shouldn't it have a modern sleek case to match it? Then look no further than Bullstrap's leather phone cases. These cases are the definition of style with their minimalist design, comfortable feel, and variety of color options. Spoil yourself this Christmas with a case from Bullstrap. I have the simple minimalist design in South Beach Pink, but Nick got the portfolio case in Ocean for his iPhone 14. They all come in that chrome tan leather that can't be beat. Their selection of cases is made for phones old and new and features either this open bottom or a closed bottom design, to your preference. Upgrading from the hard plastic of my old case to this soft leather was worth it for me when I'm on my phone for hours cooking up new army lists for my next games. If you're not satisfied or something happens to your case, the company offers free replacements with their lifetime warranty. Interested in getting one of these cases for yourself now? Then you can get it for 15% off with my code EOB15 to get 15% off. Everything you need is in the description below, so don't miss out on this limited time opportunity. With the gray on there, I switched to a black, Grim Black. This is a color I have used tons, but never in marker form. I used this to shade the gray, hitting the lower parts of the metal, the bottom half of his sword, and each down-facing chunk of metal. Painting over speed paint was no problem. I didn't have any problem of rubbing or scratching the previous layer, and they went over each other smoothly and nicely. My metal is looking more interesting with this two-color approach, and I decided to try a third, silver. Speed paint metallics are an interesting product. They don't do the contrast thing as well as the colors of speed paint, but they are some metallics that have some nice coverage. I used this color to edge highlight all the metal. I thought this would knock it out of the park, but the flowiness of the paint left me with some pretty thick globby edges. I would have liked to be able to do some finer detail. Edge highlighting should be razor thin, but I was able to do something that resembles edge highlighting with the pens. Looking at my orc, stacking the colors worked well on the weapons and armor, so I decided to play around with the orc skin. I took the blue color and painted this over the low spots of his flesh. I followed the black Zenithal Prime, putting this color over the black primer, and I was able to do it pretty easily. The fat tip of the pen was a little chubby, so I couldn't be as precise as I wanted, but it was fast. I switched from blue to yellow, and I painted this over the high spots of the skin. The green went on pretty thick, so the yellow had a hard time getting through. But it did push up the saturation a little, and it does add a little extra excitement to the skin. Looking at my orc, he's okay. You know, that wasn't too bad. And in about 10 minutes, I was able to cycle through 8 colors and get them down on the model. And with the felt tip of these pens, I was able to get the paint exactly where I wanted it and avoiding where I didn't want it. I got a little bit of paint on his bicep, but I think with just a little bit more practice, I could avoid even that. And he turned out fine. That's a pretty good looking orc, especially for the time investment that I put into it. Now, there's definitely some drawbacks. One of the drawbacks is that felt tip. That felt tip is unassailable. A paintbrush has bristles that'll kind of deform and follow the different contours and shapes of the miniature, but that felt tip is what it is. And so whether I'm painting on a nice flat section of the model or trying to get into the nitty gritty fine details, you kind of just gotta shove this in there to try to hit it. And the paint does flow out of the tip, but it doesn't flow very much. And so you really do have to touch every part of the model with the tip of one of these pens to get the paint down. Another problem is the saturation. I find with every speed paint that the color is a little bit too much right out of the bottle. And this is the bottle. This is what you're gonna get. There's no control. I would have liked to have the green a little bit thinner so that I could really work in those blues and yellows, but I kind of had to put on full fat green and then full fat blue and then full fat yellow. And so it doesn't look the way I would like it to look. These pens, they're kind of interesting, but they're not the way I like to use speed paint. Back to the classics. I threw some speed paint onto my palette, the same color as from the pen, but on the palette I have so much more control. The pen lays down perfect uniform strokes, but I don't want uniform, I want control. I thinned down the green speed paint 50/50 with speed paint medium and I put this over the other side of my work. The first coat tinted him green and I applied a second coat seeing what the first coat did. This second coat I put over about 60% of the model, leaving the top of his muscles, his shoulder and his head untouched. Now for that blue. Once again, I'm working with the same color as the pen, but I switched to a fine point brush. Now I can really get this on exactly over the parts that are still showing that primer black. I did about 2 coats of this blue, which I also thinned a bit with speed paint medium. Since I can put it on thick, gravity naturally pulls it down so the bottom of my shapes are getting darker and more saturated than the tops. And speaking of those tops, they're still bright and just tinged green, the perfect palette for this yellow color. I painted this over the top of all the green, and because so much of the white primer is still showing, these spots are coming out yellow, instead of just a bit warmer like I got with the pens. Without too much more effort, I got some much better looking skin. Now onto those weapons. I decided to skip the gray in favor of just watering down the grim black. Thin down about 50/50, it'll look gray over the white and be jet black as it pools in the recesses. I did a second coat just like the green, avoiding the spots that I already thought looked pretty good and focusing on darkening the recesses. Now one substitution I'm gonna make is with the silver. Silver speed paint works when you're base coating a big thing like armor or a shield, but for edge highlighting or in my case scratching, some thick heavy paint will do much better. I took an old ratty brush and I used it like a dry brush to deposit some paint over the armor and sword axe thing. This is another area where the brush matters. This janky brush leaves me with some extreme texture that really looks like chips and scratches. I don't think I could make the speed paint silver do this. Now onto the cloth parts. I put the bone color down on all the wraps and pants, turning them from a white to a nice tan. Then I took hardened leather and I thinned this down a lot and started layering. I am doing many thin layers to build up saturation. Each glaze tints the cloth a little, but this transparentness means that I don't have a harsh edge. I made sure that his butt and the upper part of his wraps were lighter than the bottoms, and I applied like 5 or 6 layers, but it didn't take much time since I'm laying down so little paint it dries in seconds. With the model mostly done, I gave it a look and decided to use a little bit more of this blue. I thinned it down a lot and I glazed this over the metal. His skin and clothing is so vibrant, I want to see some color on the metal. This blue tinge will add some nice coldness. Now he's done. The only thing left is to pick out his teeth and his evil red eyes. Speed paint can't really do this. I switched to opaque regular old paints and I quickly hit these spots and the model is still 99% speed paint, and I think he looks pretty good. The same exact colors, done 2 different ways. That is a good looking orc. My way took a little bit longer than the pens, but a lot of that was kind of necessary. It was putting the paint on the palette and then kind of deciding what level of opacity I wanted out of the paints, which was important to achieving a really good looking finish. And speaking of that finish, this did not take that long to finish. Like if I wanted to take my normal opaque paints and put them on top of this to elevate that paint job even further, I got plenty of time to do that because the speed paint knocked it out so quick. I'm still not really convinced of the marker aspect of the speed paint markers. I don't know when I would reach for this version of the color as opposed to reaching for a bottle of the good stuff. Maybe there's something to like pallid bone, because this is a color that you usually use straight for like purity seal papers. So maybe you spend your love and time on the armor and the skin and the weapons, and then you grab the marker for that last little hitting the 2 purity seals hanging off of his armor. I was excited to try out the speed paint pens because I love speed paint so much, but they kind of just solidified why speed paint is so awesome to me, because it lets me do some really hard things and also some really boring things really, really easily, particularly painting black. As somebody who's painted a lot of Black Templars, I've put a lot of black paint on a lot of miniatures, and it tends to be really boring. When you put matte black paint on a miniature, you've kind of killed that spot. That spot is dark, and it's not gonna be anything but dark unless you add more things to it. But with the power of speed paint, you can make that little area a little bit more interesting with very little effort. 3 colors I could not live without are Grim Black, Occultist Cloak, and Noble Skin, or as I refer to them, Black, Cold Black, and Warm Black. Anytime I need to paint something a dark color, I use these suckers, like on this Necron Gloctopus. Just one coat makes these guns look so much more interesting than just a regular matte black paint job could do. Or I could thin these colors down a whole bunch and turn them into a wash, like I did on this little Infinity model. By the way, these paints are available at EonsOfBattle.com. On our website, we have all kinds of hobby goodies. We got army painter paints, we got glue, both extra thick and extra thin, basing cork, basing bits, and we have terrain. Have any of you guys tried out the speed paint markers? And if so, let me know how it went in the comments below. I think they're pretty neat, and I'm gonna keep them on the desk, see if I can come up with a good use for them. But for me personally, I'm more of a speed paint classic kind of guy. Now I just wanna paint some more stuff with speed paint. I do have a lot more of those orcs.